The IMF debt snare. A systematic breakdown. A chilling statistic exists that should keep you awake at night. In 2023, the developing world surrendered $14 trillion. This was not a payment toward their actual debt balance. It was purely the interest required to keep their heads above water. Picture dollar. 14 trillion being siphoned away from the world's most vulnerable populations and funneled into the coffers of financial hubs like DC, London, and Paris. This single year of interest alone eclipses the entire economic output of nations like Australia or Spain. Here at the Economic of Fallen Empires, we look past the headlines to the math that dictates the rise and fall of civilizations. The reality of this figure is even more soul-crushing when you look at the exchange rate of aid. For every solitary dollar of assistance that enters a developing nation dollar, 14 is sucked out through rigged export prices, inflated import costs, and corporate profit stripping. It isn't a helping hand, it's a vacuum. We aren't looking at development assistance, but rather the most massive coordinated relocation of wealth in human history. Over the last 60 years, this engine has drained $62 trillion from emerging economies into the vaults of the first world. That is double the entire planet's debt, or more than the combined economic power of the US and China. This isn't an accident. It's as a legal systematic blueprint, controlled by an entity most people misunderstand. The International Monetary Fund. Over the next 25 minutes, I will pull back the curtain on the IMF debt snare, explain why it is the ultimate tool for modern subjugation, and reveal the most disturbing part: how the United States is currently walking the same path to ruin that has shackled 152 other nations. This is no longer just a story about far-off lands. It is about the countdown to the end of American financial independence, with a window of only 5 to 10 years remaining. To grasp the magnitude of this extraction, we have to look at the current landscape. Emerging nations are currently carrying $31 trillion in debt, while the U.S. owes $38 trillion. We have a safety net. They don't. We print the currency we owe. We can manipulate our own money supply and dictate our own terms. Poorer nations must borrow in dollars, euros, or yen monies they cannot create. When the bill comes due and they can't pay, they don't just lose credit, they lose their sovereignty. Today, 60% of low-income countries are in debt. Distress, a polite way of saying they are drowning or already underwater. The math is horrific. Governments are now forced to prioritize interest payments to foreign bankers over the health, education, and safety of their own citizens. Take the tragedy of Zambia as a case study. In just 3 years, their debt obligations ballooned from 20% to nearly 40% of their national budget. Consequently, healthcare and education funding was gutted to satisfy foreign creditors. In 2022, Zambia spent more than triple the amount on interest payments than it did on teaching its children. They are effectively burning their future to pay for the past. This is the hallmark of the economic of fallen empires, the systematic dismantling of a nation's foundation. If a country resists the IMF, severs their connection to global markets, triggers a currency crash, and watches the economy burn, it is total financial domination disguised as a balance sheet. To see why the system is rigged, you only need to look at who holds the gavel. The IMF claims to represent 190 nations, but the power is anything but democratic. The United States holds a unique veto over every significant move. Furthermore, the wealthy global North possesses 9 times the voting influence of the global South. It is a neutral referee. It is a boardroom where the elite make rules that favor their own portfolios. Consider this. For over 6 decades, every single leader of the IMF has been a Western European. Not once has a leader from the developing world, the very people most affected by these policies, been allowed to steer the ship. That is a deliberate design choice. The trap itself functions in 5 distinct phases. First is the crisis hook. You can't ensnare a stable nation, so you wait for a catastrophe, a war, a pandemic, or a market crash. When a nation is at its lowest point, the IMF arrives not as a savior, but as a lender of last resort, offering a rope it is actually a noose. Second is the conditional loan. The money comes with a takeover manual disguised as technical advice. To get the funds, the nation must slash social safety nets, hike taxes, sell off state assets to foreign buyers, and devalue their own currency. These aren't suggestions, they are ultimatums. This leads to the third phase, the austerity spiral. As spending is cut and taxes rise, the economy begins to suffocate. Public workers are laid off, and essential subsidies vanish, causing prices to skyrocket. Statistically, IMF programs cause economies to shrink significantly more than even the IMF's own pessimistic forecasts. As the economy withers, tax revenue dries up, and the government finds itself unable to pay the original debt, forcing them back to the IMF for more. This is Phase 4, the dependency trap. The nation becomes a debt addict, taking new loans just to cover the interest on the old ones. They lose all autonomy, becoming a puppet state where the IMF dictates every law and tax code. Finally, we reach Phase 5, permanent extraction. The nation is now a debt colony in Africa. Alone $88 billion vanishes every year through capital flight money that should be building schools, but instead heads to London or New York. The results are undeniable. Over 40 years of IMF reforms in Africa, the number of people living in extreme poverty has doubled. The continent was effectively deindustrialized under Western supervision. In Zambia, they were forced to sell their copper mines, their primary source of wealth, to foreign corporations for pennies. The corporations took the copper and the profits, leaving Zambia with nothing but holes in the ground and more debt. This same shock therapy destroyed Russia in the 90s, wiping out life savings and dropping life expectancy by 6 years, while a few well-connected men looted the state. Argentina saw a similar collapse in 2001. But why does this matter to you in 2026? Because the same mechanics are now being applied to the United States. With a $38 trillion debt and a debt-to-GDP ratio of 128%. We are on the precipice of the 130% threshold, where every empire in history has historically crumbled. We are already in the austerity spiral, spending $12 trillion a year just on interest. As we borrow more to pay for what we already owed, we are entering the same mathematical death loop. If the dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, we will face the same restructuring we forced on others. Foreign creditors will demand control of our ports, our land, and our tax revenues. This is how the economic of fallen empires chronicles the end of an era. The timeline is accelerating. Between now and 2027, interest costs will likely consume the federal budget, leading to political paralysis. By 2030, a loss of global confidence could shatter the dollar's credibility, leading to a total restructuring by 2035. To protect yourself, you must stop being a debtor and become a creditor. Erase personal debt, move into hard assets like gold or Bitcoin, and develop tangible, unoutsourceable skills. Diversify your assets across borders. The IMF is not a rescue team. It is a debt enforcer that is drained dollar. $62 trillion from the world. It promises help, but demands your soul. The blueprint has worked on 152 nations, and now the target is America. The math doesn't care about our history. It only cares about what is owed. If you want to understand the next phase of this global shift, including the rise of the Chinese debt model, subscribe and stay tuned. The trap is closing, and only those who see the pattern will survive it.